A leader's presence only matters when you're present. The Germans used it, and the Americans were not ready to go.
Retired Lieutenant General Leslie Smith spent a career in the Army as a chemical officer. He served as the chief of the chemical branch and commandant of the United States Army Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear School. He was the first chemical officer to serve as the commanding general of the United States Army Maneuver Support Center of Excellence, and the first chemical officer to serve as the Army's Inspector General. He's now the Vice President for Leadership and Education at the Association of the United States Army. General Smith, welcome to the Jedburgh Podcast.
Good to be here, brother.
It's great to be back at AUSA. So thanks again for hosting us. We were just here 10 days ago or so with the Sergeant Major.
Yeah, I'm feeling a certain kind of way about that,
You're a little jealous?
No, I just, I was the 66th Inspector General. He was only the 15th Sergeant Major of the Army. 66 above 15. But I understand you guys have a prior relationship. I got it. I know how this thing is all about relationship. It's good, man. It's all good.
But you are each first though, because he was the youngest.
He was the youngest
SMA in the Army,
yes.
And you were the first chemical officer to
how
ever be
strange is that?
IG. So
I mean, what? How does that happen?
Well, we got to talk about how that happened.
Okay, we got a lot to talk about.
You had a really great career, and we talked about so many times, especially on this podcast, we talk about special operations. We talk about Green Berets, the impact our special operators have. But we haven't really had a chance to start to dig into some of those other branches that are so critically important to our national security strategy.
You don't think chemical officers operate with special operators?
No, I do think
all
that.
right.
I just think that we often
don't talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, we don't talk about it, and then we forget it until we get into a conflict, and everyone goes, "Where's my NBC mask?"
Yeah.
And then you realize, wait, there's probably way more than just that mask that goes on here.
You're absolutely right.
So a little bit about you, Commandant, at every level, including being the chief of the chemical branch and the commandant of the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear school.
Yeah.
You were the first, as I said, the first chemical officer to serve as the IG, but also as the commanding general of the Army Maneuver Support Center of Excellence. So a bunch of firsts there.
And one more too.
Which?
I was in charge of the Army's 20th Suburban Command.
Oh,
you had to do a little bit more work. Okay.
So we got firsts all over the place.
It's all good.
And now you're the Vice President of Leadership and Education at AUSA, at the Association of the U.S. Army. So first off, sir, thank you for your leadership and thank you for your service.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
But we got to start with, what is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear? Why is it important?
Why is it important? It's about the defense of those systems. So if you remember back in the day, World War I, the Germans used it, and the Americans were not ready to go. So we had to stand up a branch called the Chemical Warfare Service to learn how to deal with that. First, we were using offensive, if you remember the 4.2-inch mortars that we used to have back in the day, a lot with the infantry. Because chemical guys used to be the mortarmen for the infantry guys before they became mortars as part of the infantry. So it's a great story. So that's how it started back in 1917, and during World War I, the defense thereof and the offensive use initially.
The Jedburgh Podcast is brought to you by University of Health and Performance. This is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
Because you can't find this on Google.
Okay.
My grandfather was in the Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay.
He was a lieutenant.
Yeah.
And his job was the development of mustard gas.
No way.
Yeah.
I got a great story. Great story about that.
Yeah.
So, the engineering regiment, that's where the chemical corps came from.
Mm-hmm.
First engineering regiment, gas and flame. The engineers are like, oh, no. But when you become the commandant, you get a chance to see behind the scenes. You get a chance to go downstairs and see all the artifacts associated from there. We even have a Mickey Mouse mask that's downstairs at Fort Leonard Wood. It was for little kids to be able to put on masks in the United States just in case something happened. But anyway, yes, we came from the engineer regiment, first engineer regiment, gas and flame, and back in the day in the 60s, they used to put mustard stains on soldiers so they would know what it felt like.
Really?
Really.
I remember my grandfather, they had an explosion in the plant
Oh, really?
I think it was at Edwards Arsenal, if I have my
Oh, really?
facts correct.
Okay.
And a lot of folks were injured. I
Yeah.
mean, but this was, rudimentary
Yeah.
R&D and
Yeah.
the, early stages
Of
of this
development.
development in these programs.
So was he a biologist, a chemist, or
He
something?
was a chemist.
Really?
Yeah. So he went to URI, University of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And he was a chemist.
He was a chemist, so he was mixing things, cool.
But let's think a bit about NBC warfare.
Yeah.
And the evolution of it. So you talk about how World War I, we know the Germans had employed it.
Right.
Then we go off in 1917, we
Right.
create kind of the first origins of this
chemical
program
warfare
later
service.
on.
Yeah.
And then we get into World War II. We didn't see a lot of it
Mm-hmm.
in World War II, but World War II brought nuclear technology
Yeah.
to the fray.
Yeah.
And it ended with, our attack on Japan.
That's right.
And then we go forward into Korea, Vietnam. There's an argument in Vietnam, was Agent Orange and some of the other
Yeah.
chemicals that were used there,
Yeah.
some by us.
You want to know what chemical officers, chemical folks did?
Yes.
They did a lot of. You remember the smoke and flame,
Mm-hmm.
the flame-filled expedients,
Mm-hmm.
the clearing of the herbicides. That they became tunnel rats too. A lot of chemical officers, chemical soldiers did that mission too. So what I used to always tell the troopers, like, hey, we got to do sometimes the things that other people don't want to do. So it was an interesting task and mission. As I mentioned before, when you become a commandant, you get a chance to see the history of every one of the commandants that came before you. I was number 25 of that time frame, and it's just an amazing story.
Well, and we've seen since that point in time, other countries
Yeah.
use chemical weapons.
That's right.
We've seen Bashar al-Assad
That's right.
used in Syria, Saddam Hussein
Yes.
used it in Iraq.
Yeah.
When you think about being the commandant, and you look back at the history and the evolution of chemical warfare, what's your assessment of it, and where are we today, and what's the likelihood that this is something that could come back?
Yeah. Well, I think the challenge is that there's always things adapting, and with the new technology that exists, there are different types of systems and processes we won't talk about on this net that could be perceived as not being chemical, but chemical warfare-like, or biological warfare-like. I mean, so if you think about anthrax, you think about all those type of things. What are some places that you could grow it or operate in it where you would see it not see it today, but you could see it tomorrow? That was the biggest concern when we had those anthrax attacks around September 11th, around that time frame. You saw the mail that came through. Yeah, so that's another story, because my unit was around the Pentagon in that time frame.
So, talk about that for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Because that is one of the prevalent examples, and people compound that with the September 11th attacks, and then there was the theory that, okay, all this is connected. Is this the start of a broader thing?
Well, it was an interesting piece because I got to give you a little background. So I was in the Pentagon 90 days prior to September 11th happened. I was in the Army Joint Staff, doing my great thing, doing international negotiations, which I don't know if we have time to talk about that today in Geneva. So I've been there many times. So I go to Fort Polk, now Fort Johnson, Louisiana. Now, you've been to Fort Polk before, haven't you?
I've actually not been.
You've not been to Fort Polk?
No.
Fort Johnson?
I'm from Boston. That's
really
way too far south for me.
Okay, we got to fix that, brother. But most of the time, well, they do rotations sometime now with heavy soft focus in that location.
We didn't used to do that.
Yeah, it's good. I think it was very good for them based off the mission set. But anyway, so we show up to this location, and Fort Polk, now Fort Johnson, we call it 90-90. 90 degrees with 90% humidity at 6 o'clock in the morning. You would walk outside, you're like, oh my gosh. But it was great preparation where we would get ready to go.
Yeah.
So 9/11 happens. I'm a battalion commander, think I'm the man. The DCG for Forces Command comes down. He just happened to be visiting that day, brings all the leaders in and says, hey, I don't know when it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. And the good thing about it is I grew up as a captain in the 82nd. Now, I heard some of your stories about that, some of those same things at Fort Bragg, now Liberty, that we had a different mindset. So in that battalion of 500 troopers, we had a platoon that was always on lockdown. The stuff was packed. It was ready to go. They're like, sir, why you got to do it? September 11th happened. We were ready to go. But let's fast forward a little bit. So we get a task of saying, hey, we think there's going to be anthrax attacks in and around, because we saw it with some of the mail things. And the country was reeling at the time, if you remember. No one knew what was going to happen next. Then the Pentagon got hit too, right? So they were saying, okay, we need to have, who's going to be the defense of the Pentagon? The Army stood up and said, we will. General King, I never forget it. It says the Army will defend the Pentagon. People are like, whoa, well, how are you going to do that? They brought the 82nd up, troopers with their weapons, because we used to have weapons outside of the Pentagon. The security you see today did not exist, right? So we get there, and so we have these things called biological detection systems, BIDS, that they put on every corner of the Pentagon. This is rudimentary.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out, where is the wind blowing? How is this going to happen? So you had troopers sitting in there. So you got the defense of the D.C. area is something that's done now, but we didn't think about it. We flew 5 C-5s from Alexandria Airport to Andrews Air Force Base in the middle of the night. I would never see it. We're driving down. Have you ever remember those Godzilla movies? You would see the little trucks driving down in the cities. I would never thought that it would have happened. And then I show up in my fatigues and everything. Everybody's like, what are you here for? I couldn't tell them. And I think about that often. But we were ready to execute those tasks and the missions because of how we prepared our unit to do what we needed to do. So it was a tough time because our bases, our installations used to be open.
Right.
Automatically, they were shut down. My kids' schools, the buses were being escorted by the 2nd ACR with a gun truck in the front and the back. They were like, what is going on? I mean, they're little kids, but it's like things changed overnight.
Yeah.
When we think about this, you think about this evolution. You've talked a lot about, and one of the first things you said was that our NBC capabilities are very defensive in nature.
Yeah.
When we look at the threat,
Yeah.
we mentioned here actors like Saddam Hussein, Bashar al-Assad, neither of one of which who are in power anymore. But let's fast forward and think about someone like Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
What is the propensity, do you think, to use that? And what's the biggest threat to the U.S. right now? Is it a nation state or is it a terrorist organization getting there?
Yes.
Something.
Yes.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. And the reason why I say that, because you never know the calculus of an individual. A nation state is tougher than a rogue actor, but on both sides. So our job, the Corps' job, and really the Army's job, is to be ready to defend against whatever happens. One of my bigger concerns is that if it doesn't happen, people's like, well, it's not going to ever happen. But that's what CBRN stands for. Could be right now.
Yeah.
Right. So the job of the chemical officer is first to be a good soldier, good leader. And then so people understand that, hey, I can soldier, but I'm going to show you how you survive and all these other pieces and parts from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how do we get our forces to think about it and think about this capability more than the one year when they're cleaning their map?
Yeah. Well, you as a leader, again, you have to get the trust of the, a chemical officer, NCO, normally are in the G3, S3 shop. So they're learning how to do all the other projects. So you're a special project officer. I used to love doing that because you had visibility. People used to laugh, hey, you have to do the USR. I'm like, yeah, but I know more about the unit than you do. So I learned a lot about organizations, learned about leadership because I was right next to the commander, right next to the 3, and I had a chance to see what those things are. And then once you get the trust and they know that you're not going to do stuff just for stupid, you got to make the case. And so the higher you go, the easier it comes because at the higher levels, it's all about building coalitions of people. So I was comfortable with doing that even at a young age.
Yeah. What did we learn from something like COVID? Where, and now
very good.
Last week, we're seeing that, even the CIA has come and said, yeah, look, we think it was made in a lab.
Yeah.
And so although we understand, and there are people out there who may believe that it was a willful act to release COVID into the environment, but however COVID started, what it does prove to us is that you can create a virus in a lab.
That's correct.
You can release it.
Yes, you can. Yeah, what it tells us is that we don't know what's next. We just have to be prepared to deal with the situation. Then as leaders, we have to be thinking about, if you think about it as a threat of the battlefield and not that one-off, as you said, you do it once a year, just like you know how you grew up in special ops. Okay, what's the threats that I'm not thinking about? What are the things I got to be able to deal with? And it's a risk analysis. That's the other thing you got to talk to commanders about, because they can't carry everything all the time. So what is the risk that we want to risk to the force, risk to the unit, risk to those things?
Yeah, I remember watching the invasion into Iraq in 2003. I mean, albeit I was in
I was a battalion commander.
college.
Yeah.
But I remember, watching multiple times as it was coming over.
Yeah.
The reporters who were embedded with the invasion force that they were donning gas masks.
Yes.
There was the threat of weapons being used by Saddam Hussein's army.
Yeah, that was another similar point. Our battalion was deployed during that time frame, and as a leader, many times you have to go where you think you need to be. And so I told my 2-star boss, because we were supporting the port operations, I said, "Hey, sir, I need to be forward," because I was the only chemical battalion in theater at the time. I'm like, if something goes bad, I got to be farther forward to to be able to support my guys, because we had guys from supporting every division, every formation to do what we need to do. But I need to be forward where the core attack and the other units were to support, just in case something bad goes down. He's like, "Okay, roger that." Me and my sergeant major are on the road traveling north, because, as you know, the leader has to be at the decisive point.
Yeah.
I saw General Austin at his retirement ceremony last week, but we both saw each other on the plane flying November 1990. I'm like, "I guess I know where you're going." It's like, "I guess I know where you're going." Like, "Yes, sir. We're both going to the same place." And then we jumped off that next year.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Let's talk about the Army for a minute.
Right. You don't want to talk about me, but you'll talk
I
about
do want to.
okay.
That's where we're going to go. That's where we're going to talk about the
Talk about
Army.
okay.
I want to know,
How does it happen?
how does it happen? Because that's true. Because in 1983, you commissioned from Georgia Southern University as a field artillery officer.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Well, the first question we got to ask there is, why'd you want to go in the Army?
Because my family always served in the Army. My dad was in the Army, Korean War vet. One of his uncles was the 11th Airborne Trooper. And it's funny, my dad died when I was 5, so I didn't understand all the things that he did, but I knew there was something that I wanted to do. And so, have you ever heard of a place called Mount Bayou, Mississippi?
No.
It was founded by freed slaves, Isaiah Montgomery and a couple other gentlemen. It was a great location to go visit as a kid. So I always knew that my last name was Smith. Hey, my uncle was an entrepreneur, had another who taught, who's a dean at a college, Alcorn State, and several others that did, different things. They were the teachers, educators, or business people. And so it was a great environment as a kid growing up. I'm from Atlanta, so I always knew I wanted to serve. So I served in the Army for 35 years. My brother, who's 5 years younger, served in the Army for 4 years. My sister was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. Her husband's too. Now my youngest daughter is an Army doc. So she took it to the next level. I was like, okay, do your thing. So Georgia Southern, that's another story. I didn't know Georgia Southern existed because I'm from Atlanta. And so I went there because a good friend of mine said that you should go down here with me. So I went there with him, and the ROTC guys gave me a deal I couldn't refuse.
What was the deal?
The deal was that we're going to make you a lieutenant in 2 years. We're like, what? What do you mean? So I'm 17 years old, and they said, hey, you come and you join the Georgia Army National Guard. So I was in the Guard for 4 years. We're going to make you a lieutenant in 2 years. So I became called simultaneous membership program. So as a freshman, I'm hanging out with the junior ROTC guys. So I had to grow up quick, So, you're 17, you think you got it going on, but you see the 19 and 20-year-old, you're like, oh, I got to raise the level of my game. So I was in the Georgia Guard in the field artillery unit. That's why I got a commission as a field artillery officer after my second year. But I didn't graduate until 1985. So I was in the Guard for 4 years. I learned a lot about what it meant to be a soldier in a field artillery unit, then a lieutenant in a field artillery unit. Then I got commissioned, and during that time frame, you probably don't remember this, but the Reagan buildup. Many of us that got branch chemical officer were from the Army Reserve and the National Guard. All of us got sent to Germany. He built up Germany. I was the first chemical officer they had in 10 years. I was like, ooh, can we touch him? Can we touch him? So I was in the air defense unit, 13 kilometers from the border. So we brought all these people in location. So Reagan says, okay, you want to do this? We're gonna bring. So we had 2 corps. It was a bunch, 4-star general all the way down. So it was at least 2 corps, and everything else that goes with having 2 corps in Europe. It was powerful.
Yeah.
And so Reagan says, hey, can you deal with this? Check and then mate.
We just had the opportunity when we were at D-Day, episode released about a week ago, actually now, to sit down with Command Sergeant Major Jeremiah Inman. He's the Command Sergeant Major for U.S. Army Europe Africa.
Yeah.
And we had a great conversation with him sitting on me at Pointe du Hoc.
Oh, yes.
In one of the gun emplacements.
You mean like Pointe du Hoc?
You know the story, right? I know the story. I AUSA logo. Yeah. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And we talked about that forward projection of power.
Yeah.
And how important that is for the Army and how important it is for the national defense of the U.S. And so when you look at our presence in Europe, although it's been significantly reduced, especially from the Cold War era, we haven't left.
No.
And it's still a critical component
of
our ability to maintain, we can call it the status quo. We certainly talk at length about the challenges to that today.
Yeah.
But it is really important.
It is. I think, and there's many ways you can do it. But when a soldier especially shows up on the ground, when you have boots on the ground, it sends a signal. A plane can fly over, a ship can drive through, but when you have boots on the ground, soldiers interacting with the people on the ground, it changes the atmosphere. It's the engagement of talking to people, learning the language, eating the food, hanging out. It really changes the culture of what it means. I have many sayings, but here's one of them. Here's one for you. A leader's presence, presence, only matters when you're present. So when you're there and they know who you are, it matters. That's why those soldiers being in Poland matters. And you never know how it comes up. So one of the people, one of my co-workers that I'm working with on a book, that's another story maybe for another time, her brother is in Warsaw, Poland. And then she told me that they had brought in some families in from Ukraine. And she says, yeah, we know they got soldiers on the ground in Poland. And I'm like, how you know that? Because everybody tells them thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm talking about. That's why this presence thing is important. Yeah. And there's many ways to do it. But when you have troopers on the ground, either in an exercise or for a station, it matters to not only to our nation, but to the world.
Yeah. Let me ask you about being the Army Inspector General.
Yeah. You don't jump far forward, but okay.
I got to get to it because I think it's really important when we talk about the Army presence. And when we think about, what is our Army there to actually do? Right. And now I think that's an important question where we sit today, because we hear so much talk. The Army, the military, for 20 plus years, we were at the forefront of the news cycle. Yeah. We're not now. Yeah. But you would probably argue it. I would probably argue as well in the same position that we are at more risk today as a nation than we've ever been. Yeah. Both from foreign external actors and internal domestic actors. And so we need to be thinking about our Army. We need to be understanding where our Army is today, the lessons from the past, and how are we going to learn from those lessons to shape the Army of the future. And the Inspector General is a big part of what that looks like.
You want to know the story about becoming an Inspector General? Oh, it's a great story. I'd never forget it. So, when you're the commanding general of any location, but I was a commanding general of Fort Leonard Wood. So you got a driver, you got an aide, you got a chief of staff, you got an enlisted aide that cooks for you, takes care of you, because you change your uniform sometimes 3 or 4 times a day.
I was an aide, so
you know the deal. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So you get a phone call from Gomo that says the chief of staff of the Army would like you to do blah 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 blah. In this case, the chief of staff of the Army would like you to become the deputy inspector general. You're like, what?
It's not really a question.
It's not. Oh no, you have a choice. You could either take it or retire, right? So that's how it works. And so I see General Allen. I never forget this. He was the vice chief of staff of the Army at the time. We were at a function in December, and I said, "Hey, sir, who did I piss off to go to this job?" He said nothing, and I just
no response.
No response. He just looked at me. I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess I keep moving." But what I found out later was what leaders do is talk about what needs to happen in organizations. And so the trade-out commander, God rest his soul, General Cohn, told me, he said, look, we need to change the culture And then you also find out that whoever the 3-star is has a lot to do with whoever they want as the deputy. So Dave Quantock was coming in to be the inspector general. He says, "I want Les Smith as my deputy." I'm like, really? Come on, Dave. But anyway, it blew my mind. I had no idea all the things that the inspector general does. Most people think it's about investigations only, right? Senior official investigations. And as the deputy, my nickname was Darth Vader.
Why?
Because I had to call them, all my peers on the phone that says, "You're the subject of an investigation." That's no fun, right? But first I would never lose my job over somebody else. And many of these investigations don't provide any substantiation at all. And many of them are just investigations because you got to look into what those things are. The problem is those that are published that come out from a negative perspective, because that's what you see when you become a general officer, SES. It's all in the paper. Enlisted guys, most of the time not, unless they're high-level senior enlisted people. There's not investigation. So as a deputy, I was responsible for doing all the background work, but the IG does investigations, assistance, and inspections for that 1.3 million soldiers and civilians, right? There's two ways of looking at it. One way is to be reactive. One way is to be proactive. I chose to be the proactive person when I became the inspector general. So I spent most of my time talking to leaders about how to stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
And those who listened did well. Now some did not, because the standard is a standard. And we have to make sure that the soldiers trust us, the nation trusts us, Congress trusts us, our leaders trust us in the things that we do. And it's not personal, but it has to be done to the standard. And, we have the schoolhouse where we train IGs, because IGs work from 4-star level down, but they all get trained at the IG school at Fort Belvoir. And they learn how to do the efficiency, effectiveness to support commanders.
You mentioned standards.
Yeah.
I had a chance, I think last year, but the episode came out last April or so, to sit down with the current Sergeant Major of the Army, Mike Weimer.
Yeah.
And he has very strong opinions that he shares in our conversation about standards.
Yeah.
They've even reintroduced the Blue Book.
Oh, yeah.
And
who developed that? Von Steuben.
It was in the Army, but then it went away for a while.
I know, but who developed it?
I don't know.
Von Steuben. He was the first effective inspector general. Did you know that?
No.
Yes.
No, and Sergeant Major Weimer did not tell me that.
Well, that's okay. I'm telling you. I was like, when he came out, I was like, yes, way to go, sir. So we could tell that story. So Washington, General Washington was having a problem with standards in his force. So he brought a Prussian in to help with the standards. So he came in and says, no, you cannot use the bathroom at the same place where you sleep. That's where standards about latrines, standards about how you eat, how you dress, how you fire. He came and brought those standards, and that was a precursor to the non-commissioned officers for our Army.
Which is the biggest differentiator between our military and everybody else.
Hands down.
And they enforce those standards.
That's right.
When we think about standards, we think about where the Army is today. A lot of people, are out there publicly, and you can go to our YouTube channel and look at the comments. And I'm actually often shocked and yet appalled at times about the amount of comments that we get about people who distrust our Army and distrust our government and distrust the standards. And when we think about the evolution of standards, I always felt, and I can only speak from my personal opinion, but when I was in the Army from 2003 to 2016, that standards existed. And I think my career in the infantry and going into special forces proved that you had to meet a standard.
You did.
That's what we talked about. But when we look at the Army today, has the standard changed? And where are we when we look at standards in the Army today?
I think standards exist. They still exist. It has to be enforced, just like when you and I both were there by leaders. So good thing. I got to back up a little bit. So I told my IGs this, and it really applies across the board. Inspectors generals are training multiple generations of leaders. Right? So as a young captain, do you remember when we used to have the ULAC down at Fort Bragg? where they took all the equipment after he got inspected and it got locked down. You probably remember that.
No.
Because the brigade, the DRB, they would go through an inspection, and the equipment got locked down. So I'm a young company commander. So I see these leaders, NCOs like, wow, NCOs like, oh, here I am, I'm the man. I'm like, who are these guys? I find out later that they're Inspector General NCOs. So they're training, they take my equipment, they inspect it, they make sure everything is squared away. And then I got smart and says, I don't want to wait until the inspection time for them to tell me what was right or wrong.
Right.
So I go see them before the time frame. So I get trained as a young captain. Little did I know, 20 years later, 25 years later, that I would be the Deputy Inspector General, then the IG. But I got trained of, hey, use the IG before something happens. Let's see what the standards are, because they're the repository of many of these standards, because they got all this background stuff. They have this whole enterprise all the way back up to the Department of the Army that can help you see what those inspections were in the past, what are some of the tools that they've sent across other units. And that's what helps us across the board. But when it comes to standards, every leader is responsible for enforcing the standard. As soon as we walk away from one, allow it to not be met, we've established a new standard. And frankly, that applies, in my viewpoint, outside of the military too. If we allow our people to be treated a certain way and we don't correct it, we've established a new standard.
When I work with athletic teams and companies, we talk about standards and the upholding of standards a lot. And I'll go into the locker rooms in athletic teams, and I'll tell them, if your locker's a mess, or your locker room's a mess, or the weight room's a mess, that's the standard you set. And so if we're having, oftentimes they'll bring me in and they'll say, we have a performance issue on the field. Okay, let's go to the locker room.
Yeah, let's go see it.
Let's go to the weight room. And then you often see, well, the locker room's a disaster. There's weights on the floor. There's trash on the floor. And the very first thing we start talking about is, why'd you walk by the trash?
That's right.
Because if you are a senior and you walk by the trash, well, so do the juniors, the sophomores, and the freshmen.
You establish them.
So the first step of that is you have to enforce it.
Right, which in turn turns into the climate and the culture of the organization, right? So climate beats strategy all day, right?
Yes.
All day, every day. And twice for lunch.
I want to ask about the culture, because you brought it up. The Army, and Sergeant Major Daly and I had this bit of this conversation last week too. The Army has a job. The Army's job is to
support, fight and defend the nation's war. Yeah.
That is inherently a difficult job.
It is.
But it is also a job that we really, I believe, shouldn't sugarcoat. What is it? In order to fight and win our nation's wars, we have to develop a culture of war fighters who, at the end of the day, are willing to take a life and possibly give their own in defense of the nation. Yet we have seen over time a bit of softening in the messaging around the culture of the Army. Have we forgotten that we're war fighters at heart? And in order to be an effective war fighter, that has to be the message. You have to be willing to go out there and violently execute a very difficult mission.
Yeah. I think we have to tell the story about what the mission of the Army is, but all of the missions of the Army. I mean, the 150 plus jobs that exist, and there's no front line, it's all together. And so folks got to understand what that task is. I mean, support and defend that Constitution means that. So yeah, we need to be upfront with people, but we just need to tell people, young people, what are the options and opportunities that exist for our jobs? Because everybody can't be an infantryman, even if they want to be. Everybody can't be a special ops guy, because you got to have everything associated to support them to do that task. So let's talk about all of them, but everybody's got to do the mission. I laugh because my daughter had to learn how to fire an M4 and a 9mm, and she hadn't fired one of those before. And she went to the field. She's like, Dad, I'm like, you know why you're doing that? Because they treat them like medics. So when they become docs, they can have an appreciation for what that means. So I think the other part that we have to do is talk about not only the task, but what's the purpose of the task? What's the purpose of the mission? How does it support that special ops guy? How does it support the infantry guy that's doing the mission and the task that needs to happen? I had a great platoon trainer. He trained us like infantrymen back in 1986. We were digging foxholes. We're like, why are we doing that? Because you're going to be with them. You're going to operate with them. I want you to be able to speak, look like, walk like, talk like, and hang with, because that's how you get the respect.
You had a 35-year career.
Yes.
And through that time, you saw the Army ebb and flow.
Yes.
And you saw, a heightened public perception of the military as we went into the Gulf War in 91, as we went into Afghanistan, and we went into Iraq. But you also saw the interwar periods. In your opinion, what do we need to be doing now to rebuild the Army, build the Army? I don't like using the term rebuild because the Army evolves.
How about maintain?
Maintain.
Yeah.
What do we need to be doing now?
Yeah.
And what's what's the next threat?
Yeah. I will tell you is tell your story, not my story, but tell your story. Because I think the big, be all you can be, which I'm glad we should have never left that one, but that's a nice story for another day.
I agree with you.
Be all you can be. We all became who we are because of our service. And that's what we need to tell young people. So I teach leadership at Georgia Southern where I went to school, and I don't talk to ROTC guys. I mean, I talk to them when I visit, but I talk to the College of Business. Every class, there's one or two young people that says, how can I do some of that? And I don't always tell them, just join the military. I said, well, let's find whatever your purpose is, right? So everybody's looking for a sense of purpose, and we found our sense of purpose in our military service. So some people, that's right. Some people it could be Boys and Girls Club. Some people it could be teaching inner city school. But we have to help young people find their purpose. And that in turn, because every generation, and I don't know if COVID did it or what did it, they all want to have a sense of purpose in life. And again, I think this is a great way to have a sense of purpose. That's why I'm here at AUSA, is to help talk about that purpose, because those are our 122 chapters, which are across the world, they're embedded in our communities. They're telling those stories. If you get one person, like our high school ROTC person, I didn't know this, but he says, hey, you ever thought about joining the National Guard? What would have happened if he hadn't talked to me back when I was a senior in high school? Where would I be? I don't know. Georgia Southern. That guy says, hey, I got this great deal. But if we don't have the conversation, we know what won't happen because they won't know. We owe it to young people to talk about what those options are and how they exist.
I think it's important, too, as we see the GWAT generation retiring, that everybody remembers they need to be proud of their service.
Yes.
And they have a story to tell.
Right.
And, what I don't want to happen, and I don't think we will, but, I think that there's a lot of polarization in society right now around this, is that we end up like we did, to some extent. I don't think it'll be as bad, but after the Vietnam War, where you have folks who don't want to talk about their service and don't want to share those experiences. Because I think, as you said, getting out there, talking about it, talking about things that went well and also things that didn't go well, will motivate that next generation to reduce that interwar lull that we may have.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on all of us to talk about those things. But again, I call it the one over the world thing. It's about, hey, going to Germany was great. South Korea, I took my family there. It was our best assignment, and that's true. It was our best assignment. My wife didn't want to go, but it was great. My kids were eating, strange stuff that they like, what? I'm not. But it was stuff that you learned. It was cultures that you understood that, families and friends and people that we know from around the world. My kids are international people because they understand and they have an appreciation for all cultures, respect for all cultures, and they understand what that means. I had to bring one of my nephews up here to D.C., grew up in Orlando, didn't know anything, brought him to D.C., his mind was like, pooh. Like, look, man, let me explain to you. But if you don't grow up except in one space, this is all you know. So we owe it to young people to see what those things are, what those options are.
Yeah. You brought up AUSA.
Sure.
In your role leading leadership and development here, what are you focused on?
Everything. So if you think about the mission of AUSA is support for the soldier. Jack Haley, one of our vice presidents, got three of us, me, Dan Daly, and Jack. Jack is like the logistician. He does the big conference. He does all the the pieces and parts.
That thing's huge.
It's great.
I never saw anything like that.
Yeah, it's where it's supposed to be. It's AUSA. The Army's big, right? AUSA's got to be big. We got to be bad. But I provide the content. So you think all the speakers, all the panels, the senior executive roundtables, we do hot topics. So we take what the Army senior leaders are talking about, and then we amplify it during the year. Because you know how long it takes for a message to get down to the force? About 18 months. So we reiterated again. We just had one on the installation, on the enterprise. But anyway, it had to do with logistics, enterprise for the nation. And so we brought all these. You had a DLA director here, the G4 that was here, and you had the Army Military Commander. So it was a great topic. Over 200 people showed up because everybody is trying to figure out how the infrastructure, as it ages, how we're upgrading. So we're ready to execute that next task because we're not going to have a year to build up like we did for 9/11,
right?
Or even for 2003, because it's not going to be that way anymore.
Yeah.
So that's what I do, and that's why I took the job here, is because I teach leadership at Georgia Southern. The Center for Leadership that we stood up is teaching leadership back to the Army, stuff that we learn, helping the guys to understand why your presence matter, how you build trust in organizations, what's purpose look like. And it's great. And I love doing what I do every day.
Well, I got time for one more question for you, and we're going to hit that leadership piece.
Sure.
I want to ask you about habits.
Yeah.
Because I think habits are critical in leadership. We were talking before we started about the origin of the Jedburghs. And when I think about the Jedburgh mission and the 3-man teams that parachuted behind enemy lines starting the night before D-Day, they were given very general guidance.
Yes.
Win at all costs.
Yes.
But I think they had to do 3 things, and you've heard of these 3 things certainly in your military career, but they had to do 3 things effectively every single day. They had to become routine, second nature.
Sure.
If they did these 3 things, then they could focus on the more complex task that was at hand, which was defeating the German army. But they had to be able to shoot, they had to be able to move, and they had to be able to communicate.
Yeah.
They couldn't think about it. They just had to do it. Instinct.
Yeah.
What are the 3 things that you do every day in your world to be successful?
Physical training, reading, and engaging. But I got to tell you a story, and I was talking about this the other day. You know what a towing pinto is and a cotter pin?
Yes.
Yeah. So I had a non-commissioned officer tell me that the reason why I am where I am is because of great non-commissioned officers. And Dan Daly reminds me of that all the time. But the point is, in the motor pool, we check towing pinto and cotter pins. That was the standard on Monday. If on Friday it wasn't squared away, we released all the soldiers. You know who fixed the towing pinto and cotter pins? For your listeners, a towing pinto slides down, the cotter pin goes inside. If it doesn't work, then when you need to tow something, you can't do it because you don't have a cotter pin. It seems very simple, but if you have attention to detail, you understand what the standard is, and the leaders are enforcing the standard, then you could do the other things. It's blocking and tackling, Washington Commanders, great. They lost this weekend because they couldn't do the basics. They had 4 turnovers. You don't win games that way. That's the same thing with us. If I don't exercise every day, I don't look like the leader I'm supposed to look like. I don't have the confidence, and the people don't have the confidence in me, right? And then if I'm not thinking about what's happening in the world every day, then I can't communicate that. And then lastly, if I'm not engaging people, understanding how they're feeling, the only way to have a finger on the pulse of the people is by spending time with them, right? You can't feel the pulse this way. You got to be here, right? For your listeners, don't go around and touch your people. But you got to know what's going on, right? How are you doing today? Like when I walked in, like, who's this guy coming in to see you? Last week when Dan was there, I do that all the time. This is doing the Pentagon. I love doing it in the Pentagon. Can you imagine a tall, bald-headed 3-star stopping a major in the hallway? They're like, oh. But you got to engage folks, right? And so all those guys are now colonels and generals. They're like, thank you, sir. I appreciate you for talking to us. Because sometimes they are not seen. That's how you find out what's happening within your organization. That's what we got to do as leaders every day.
Those 3 are great. The basics.
The
basics. PT, reading, and engaging those around you. I think all of that's critical.
Yeah. That's how you keep your finger on the pulse. Yeah.
Well, General Smith, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to sit down with us this morning on this early on a Monday.
Oh,
You've got
good.
a big week ahead of you. And I sincerely appreciate all the support that AUSA has given to myself and my team and the hospitality here over a couple of episodes. And I very much look forward to continuing to build the relationship.
Yeah, we
with
got people
you
to
guys.
talk to.
So
We need to be on site. There's some places or things I think we need to do together.
I'm all about it. We got to
Okay.
get you involved with Green Beret Foundation.
Okay,
too,
right
'cause
to
we
that.
got a lot of synergy.
Will I be able to do a halo jump, tandem jump somewhere?
Hey, we know the Golden Knights, so they've been on. You listen to the episode, so let's get them in here and make it happen.
Yeah, right to that. All right, brother.
Thanks,
Thanks
sir.
a lot.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.